Welcome to the Coalition for Decentralized Healthcare and Life Sciences. What is DeSci podcast? Today our speakers are Jelani Clarke, Executive Lead at DeSci World, and AminoChain Sales and Marketing Head. Filippo Frangioni, Novo Nordisk Product Manager and Nordic Blockchain Head of Partnerships. And Jim Nasr, CEO, Acoer. Let's get right into this authentic discussion.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Nasr. I'm the CEO at Acoer and one of the co-leads for the Coalition for Decentralized Healthcare and Life Science, which is a group of decentralized folks, leaders in healthcare blockchain, have been together for some time and really made it more of a formal, if you like, group to really drive some of these ideas around what is decentralized health, how do we enable it, what is DeSci, which is really the topic for today. I'm formerly Chief Software Architect at the CDC and with a lot of experience building quite large-scale healthcare systems and a lot of work also in the pharma space and clinical research. My colleague Filippo Frangioni is also with me. Filippo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Jim. Hey, my name is as a product manager at Novo Nordisk, and my background is in building products within digital health. I am also running a blockchain community at Novo, but most of all, I'm part of CDHLS together with Jim and advocating for the use of decentralized healthcare in the life science space. I'm also part of NBA, short for Nordic Blockchain Association. I know you from the US might confuse it with something else, but where basically we are a community gathering professionals working in the blockchain and Web3 ecosystem in the Nordic countries. And we are running events, we are running for example, roundtables and working groups across public and private sector. So I'm an advocate for blockchain technology and having a background in healthcare. I've been advocating for getting those two words together for a few years. So I'm happy actually to have joined CDHLS a few months ago and started on this journey together with Jim.
Excellent, thank you.
Maybe Jelani, yeah.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So, hi, everybody. My name is Jelani. I'm a neuroimmunologist by training. I've been in the biotech space for about 10 years now. Started off my career in traditional science, obviously through the PhD and then into industry when I started to see that there were a lot of problems in academia that I wasn't willing to jump through hoops for. Got my kind of whistle wet with the business side of TradSci, and saw a lot of the opportunities that were present there to help push innovation in science, but also saw a lot of the pitfalls and gaps, specifically from a technological perspective, but also from an administrative kind of thinking space of how science can get done. And that kind of led me into my journey of trying to find alternatives to help support the advancement of science in a more equitable way. Spent a few years in the blockchain space, more from the financial side, and that's where I started to learn about things beyond just tokens and crypto, but the actual technology that powers decentralized finance. And I saw a lot of similarities between problems that exist in traditional finance and that exist in traditional science that blockchain was supposed to or could purportedly help solve. And so I went down a long rabbit hole, looking into the application of these novel technologies in science. And that's what led me into discovering the early movement of decentralized science. And I'm talking about 5 years ago or so. Started consulting in that space because I very quickly realized that there were a lot of really innovative, smart people building tools for science without actually understanding the culture and the industry of science. And we were seeing a lot of friction between we can build a blockchain and we can build these applications. We can use NFTs to solve problems in science without really understanding that science has a structure to it. And you can't just try to shoehorn these things in, it doesn't work. And so I started to consult, ended up joining a group or forming a group of people to launch my first active initiative called DeSci World. So I'm one of the co-founders of a platform called DeSci World, which is focused on educating and onboarding people into DeSci, We've since expanded that to start to build out actual platforms in the AI and knowledge economic space. And then through a circuitous path of consulting with hundreds of projects coming out of DeSci, I met the founders of AminoChain, Casper Barnes and Max Matthews, and I saw that they were building something that I think would really change some of the foundational elements of how science is done. And they graciously invited me to come on board. And so I think I was employee number three or participant number three in the AminoChain ecosystem at the very beginning and been going at it ever since, balancing DeSci World and AminoChain. And now we've grown to a group of 13 individuals building out, protocol infrastructure to help support life sciences in a more ethical way. So that's kind of my journey. Been in and out of been in the DeSci space for almost going on 6 years now.
Yeah, it's fantastic, Jelani. So I think this maybe begs the initial question, and you talked about it a little bit, but what is DeSci? Just kind of from your, I think we all probably have a little bit of experience with this in different ways, but I'd like to hear yours since you've actively been doing this in anger for a while.
Yeah, I mean it's always a great question because everyone has their own version of that answer. To me, decentralized science, and that's what DeSci stands for, obviously, decentralized science, but to me, it's an extension of the open science movement, right? I don't want to make the claim that DeSci is this really new avant-garde way of doing science. It is a kind of budding off piece of open science movement. Sorry, it's early time morning here. With the goal being to apply novel technology to making science more equitable and disintermediated. And I want to be very careful when I say that. The goal of DeSci, or at least the goal of the DeSci that I see, is not to necessarily get rid of traditional systems. It is to build a complementary ecosystem that opens up the playing field for science, that allows for traditional science to exist, but then where things fall short there, gives alternatives to scientists, patients, citizen science, basically anybody who wants to participate and contribute to the scientific record of knowledge to be able to do so. So the way that I equate it is DeSci is opening up the playing field for more contact to happen in science because science is effectively a contact sport and you need collaboration, you need multidisciplinary perspectives. We all know that multidisciplinary teams tend to go further because of the input of different insights and perspectives. And so to me, that's what DeSci is. It is a means with which to increase the surface area where science can be done.
Yeah.
And Jelani, maybe sorry if I can jump in here, and I'm very happy to hear that you say that you see DeSci as something that can live together with traditional science, and you don't see DeSci as potentially replacing traditional science in the future, because those are, I've not been for too long in the DeSci space, but I'm definitely with you on that, and I think it's really important that DeSci works on the credibility of this ecosystem that has a great potential of revolutionize the way we do science together with traditional healthcare, together with patient communities, and providing basically better incentive structures to traditional healthcare and pharma and universities to run science. So,
Yeah. I agree. In fact, Filippo and I, we had this kind of little workshop that we did a few months ago, and this was kind of a big theme, right? Filippo, I think you ran it and did a great job with Rafa and some other folks, Rafa from Molecule. But it really was this idea of like, we understand traditional science, and like you were saying, Jelani, it is a contact sport. I really like that. I'm going to plagiarize it from now on.
By all means.
I may occasionally give you credit, but I like that. There is structure to it. There is to do it properly, there is rigor, right? And to be taken seriously, there is rigor. So I think that's definitely well and good. Even in this current climate of science kind of getting I don't know, just maybe a bad rap in some ways. But this kind of context of there are things we can do maybe differently, maybe better, maybe at a far lower cost with DeSci that isn't really maybe it's supplementary to traditional science, clinical science, or maybe it's part of the kind of the preclinical phase before you're, kind of going down the path. So I like that because Filippo, I think you and I probably both, saw this in our workshop that, if you take one extreme or the other extreme, then the conversation becomes a difficult one because you're trying to be adversarial about minute points that in the large scheme maybe just edge cases, maybe just gray, and it's okay, we deal with gray all the time, but having the spirit that we can blend this, I think makes sense. So Jelani, I want to kind of spin up a little bit. You mentioned you're working with AminoChain, which is great. I didn't actually realize that you were one of the employee number 3, and so I've been there for a long time. As you guys know, my background, a lot of the work that I've done for many years now with Acoer has been building kind of infrastructure for decentralized healthcare. If you like, we don't necessarily call ourselves DeSci, but I'm intrigued, and I think you have also kind of talked about this in recent times, that DeSci requires infrastructure, that there's got to be a discipline that you're providing. So I kind of want you to delve into that, that maybe Filippo, you and I can chime in, because I think it's clearly open science, or open tech, open source is a part of it. Transparency is a part of it, but there's a lot more to it. So I'd like you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, DeSci is very broad, right? And a lot of conversations occur within DeSci around the realm of the biomedical space. And rightfully so, we all care about our health, and without health, you don't really have anything else. But science is extremely broad. And I would almost say that the application of DeSci and novel tech is probably better suited for non-human subject research perspectives, because with transparency, with ownership, with governance, with changing of these administrative paradigms, comes friction in terms of privacy, ethics, how you deal with people, and what people should and should not be allowed to do and see. And so I actually think that the most difficult, even though it probably will be the more rewarding path, is the biomedical context. And that DeSci and some of its applications are more suited currently for the non-biomedical stuff. So I just wanted to say that because people often conflate DeSci with health. But this is health focused, so that is it. But to your point, yeah, infrastructure, right? Like DeSci, the biggest problem in health that I find, or that I think we all realize, is that our infrastructure is archaic, right? The reason that we have so many intermediaries in the place of science, which is great, was great at a time where that was the best technological opportunity to move forward is actually what ends up slowing it down in such a fast-paced world. Right? We see it in the financial space. Having smart contracts, being able to automate the processes, being able to have a very complete auditable trail where you don't need 1,000 people involved to make sure that the handoffs happen. A lot of that similarity can exist within the biomedical space. We don't need a lot of these intermediaries, and whoever has a job as an intermediary, that's not to say that you're worthless, but there are ways to operationalize and make things a lot more efficient. And I see that that is where the most value is going to come with these applications, these not blockchain, AI, what have you, these decentralized or more so federated than decentralized applications are worthwhile in the bioeconomical space, right?
Yeah.
And that is not to say that funding vehicles and novel asset creation classes like NFTs are not valuable there, but I think over the last 5 years, we've seen that it's not sufficient.
Yeah.
It's not sufficient to actually nucleate change within the biomedical space. It may get a little bit of the way there, or maybe a tool that can be leveraged on top of an infrastructure, of a better infrastructure. But really, we're still missing that fundamental layer, that operating software, right? That operating system that can help make science much more efficient.
Yeah, you said something really interesting, Jelani, and this, excuse me, it's this idea of early morning for me too. It's this idea of federating disparate systems
Yeah.
versus what I've been in the blockchain space, since very, very long time ago, probably 2014 or so. So there is this purist mentality that I think some people have about blockchain, and this Marxist, kind of point of view, which, I mean, it's fine if you're coming from a, like a an encryption or kind of like a digital cash kind of perspective, that kind of makes maybe sense. But when we're trying to put in practical lenses for healthcare, which is, as we know, highly fragmented, highly regulated, highly, essentially gated by very few, very, very large entities,
Yeah.
it really doesn't play that well. But I think this idea of federation, like apps or even infrastructure that allows like federated queries with transparency, with auditability, to go across multiple data sources without displacing them, or without first requiring code to decentralize everything, where every single person has, like their own self-sovereign identity and things like this, which is great, but not really that practical, even today in 2025, right? Even now with the new administration in the US and the Genius Act and all this, like more of a pro, kind of crypto and, things like this, we're a long ways away. We're probably decades away from that kind of a vision. So
Yeah, I'd always,
feedback.
well, I would say even to that, like to allow for that vision to make sense, to your point, to allow for people to actually be completely self-sovereign in their capacity to own their own assets and determine how that's mediated and who gets access to that. I don't think people understand the level of infrastructure that would required to make that scalable, to make that something that would not slow down the system from moving, right? It's like imagine a world where, and we talk about this a lot in DeSci, where everybody owns their own data, and so if and or when pharma or anybody wants to get access to you or wants to get access to data, they have to liaise and negotiate with you as an individual. Now, scale that out to a clinical trial that may have hundreds to thousands of participants. And an endpoint user, a researcher who just wants to get their research done, is already crunched in terms of resources, now has to go through legal agreements with 1,000 individuals to get that, negotiate specific terms on how to access your data. If we're talking about bottlenecks in traditional science, that would stall the entire system, right? So there's always going to be this trade-off where there's this concept of, yes, we want to empower individuals, but we also need to keep the ball rolling to actually help these individuals, and making it so granular where everybody has to have a say. I think that it's a nice dream, but how do we practically get there? And is that even a necessity at that point? I think there's ways to allow people to be more engaged. What I would say is my dream currently, at least in the short to medium term, is to de-abstract science. Science has been abstracted so far away from people by virtue of just how the system works that they don't understand. They don't trust, and it's fine if they don't trust, but they need to start to feel confident that there is positivity coming out of this. And the only way for that to happen is for them to become more proximal to the actual process. And so our perspective, my perspective, and the perspective of AminoChain, and the perspective of DeSci World, and anybody who I think is a true KOL in the DeSci space understands that the idea is not really to break down the system, as we spoke about before. It's to bring people, whether it be patients, researchers, scientists, whomever, closer to where the value resides and allow them to actually see, to your point on transparency, what is happening. And in that way, they can determine whether they do or don't want to participate. And they can also have, again, not trust, because trust almost confers ownership to somebody else, but confidence by virtue of the fact that they can either audit or they can see when something is happening that they may not want to be a part of, and then they can pull out. So it's kind of harmonizing all of these existing aspects with these novel paradigms of let's just make things a lot less black boxy by virtue of building better infrastructure that streamlines things but still allows a level of visibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had a question for you, Flo. Continue your comment.
Yeah, I wanted to say what you're saying, Jelani, is very interesting. And personally, I'm coming from a pharma background, so I've seen things from the other side, and I understand what are the pain points. And in order to be able to connect with traditional healthcare, you need to solve some of those pain points that can get them to give you the right support. And currently, I see a little bit of friction because, as you say, there's a lot of people who are native from the DeSci space who see big pharma as the bad guys, who want to centralize the information. And of course, on the other side, I'm also coming from the blockchain space on my other second phase, and I know we all advocate for decentralization, but as we have seen in other industries, in energy, in the financial industry, it's going to be hard, and institutions, big players will try to come up with ways to not to be disintermediated. So I think it's really important that we are feet on the ground and trying to find a good middle ground, I would say. So personally, I was actually introduced to DeSci a couple of years ago, I think by Anka Petre, who's also one of the top voices in blockchain and AI in healthcare. She asked me actually if I wanted to support her in co-creating DeSci Nordics, which would be a new group starting up in the Nordic countries. So and I said, yes, sure, why not? Like, tell me more about DeSci. And then I got to know a lot of people who are very passionate, coming from universities and traditional science, who created this community, right? Like, it's really community driven. So that's what really interested me also from a pharma background, to understand, okay, patients, communities are actually driving things on their own, while we say we're patient driven. So I actually joined the group and collaborated in creating DeSci Nordics 2 years ago in Tallinn. So we had this full day event where people came from all over the place, all the DAOs, Molecule, and all the first players within the DeSci space. Probably DeSci World was there as well. And then we actually decided to replicate that the year later in Stockholm. So we have done it in Stockholm as well, DeSci Nordics again, as part of the Nordic Blockchain Conference, but this time as part of the main conference, so that we could also get out of this little community, right? The community is so powerful, but you need to get out. You need to explain what DeSci is. So I was quite happy that we got a lot of traction there, and hopefully we can continue again next year and maybe build a larger community as well in the Nordics.
I think that's great. As somebody who spent time in the more technical space, but also the community building of DeSci, I mean, there's very few people that I've run into DeSci that I've introduced DeSci to, or that have been around the space, that have completely annexed it. There's always an open appetite to have a conversation. Now, that also needs to turn practical. There are people who will admonish certain aspects of DeSci, which I think is rightfully so. And in particular, that's what I want to kind of lean. I love kind of podcasts like these, because it gives us the opportunity to not just be an echo chamber, like actually talk about it outwardly and hear the feedback. There was a period in time in DeSci very early on where it was just a kumbaya space. Like, everyone was patting themselves on the shoulder, and we were having, some sort of positive views, and from the external, by virtue of Molecule doing a lot of great marketing on the DeSci space, and many others doing so as well. But there was very few conversations about, like, how do we actually bring people in? Because if you go to any of these different conferences, you end up seeing the same people over and over again, right? Like, we haven't run into each other because I didn't go, Conv2X, fantastic conference, highlight. You guys should go. Everyone else who's listening to this should go next year.
We're there, Jelani.
Exactly. I couldn't make it this year, but I was there the year prior and met fantastic, amazing people. That is a really good conference, because I find it actually bridges the divide between traditional science and the actual scientific application with novel technology. Whereas some of these more grassroots DeSci events, which are still great, don't pull in that same participant profile. Like, there's not as many scientists or external scientists coming in, and really that's what we want to do. We don't want DeSci to exist. In truth, it's like this interesting thing. I do not want DeSci to exist. I want DeSci to just be synonymous with the concept of science. This is just how we do science better. In the same way that finance is going to be done better, and AI-based science is going to be kind of just the norm moving forward. We want to introduce these novel technologies, these novel concepts, these socio-technological shifts to allow it to just be science. And it starts with small communities like these, but yeah, it's getting the word out, getting people out, and being able to show them practical tools that they can use, which is the other point, right? I think DeSci is now hitting an inflection point, or the movement is now hitting an inflection point where tools are maturing, projects are maturing, and are actually putting out things that scientists can use in day-to-day type things, right? Whether it be Research Hub with their ecosystem, or Molecule in their financial ecosystem, or what used to be DeSci Labs is still around, but a little bit less so, for their publishing ecosystem, AminoChain, you guys, and everybody else who was at the Conv2X, right? Rama with Block Cube, Giancarlo with Circle, David Stefanich, who used to be a part of Remedy but has now moved on to something else. Like there's so many tools now for the clinical space, for the general scientist space. I think the next few years is going to be interesting.
Yeah. So, Jelani, you said something that's, I think, very, very important. And I really agree with you, but it bears us delving into it, which is the crypto space tends to be echo chambery. There is an agenda, like people have an agenda, and oftentimes, it's the token that they're affiliated to, or they're the retail investor in, or the foundations that are promoting very, very specific, kind of things. I'm going to say use cases, but it's generally like one big use case. I mean, very few, as you know, very few foundations or L1s genuinely do like really have even have people who understand health or science. That they're generally kind of like marketing people or financial people who are, kind of like promoted to some elevated level of I don't know, like charity. I don't know, but regardless,
Yeah.
there is not a whole lot of in-depth, like thinking about what are the use cases. Where do we go beyond these like little acronyms, which I honestly I feel like DeSci, I fully agree with you. I think it's more alienating than helpful.
Yeah.
DeFi, same. You talk to real like quote normies, which is like a real disrespectful way of referring to 99% of people who are not, like messing around with crypto wallets and things.
Yeah.
Um, this doesn't really help like your where like science or decentralized science and things like this kind of can be boiled down to what they may perceive as some silly image, and like some thing that you're trying to sell that they don't really understand anything
Yeah.
behind, but then you're trying to make the claim that, well, the intellectual property for, a whole bunch of like longevity is tied to this. That doesn't really help. I think for people like us, it's important to kind of bring some kind of a balance where we're not, like crypto fanboys. We're trying to kind of say, all right, the reality is, yes, there's an opportunity, but it's not an opportunity we can just like, be fanatical about without like really understanding, yeah, what is some of the structure? Like I think you
Yeah.
mentioned structure. So I really, again, I don't want to kind of digress here, but it's something that personally irks me. Um,
No, no, I think you're right. I think you're spot on, right? Like we consider this, we talk about the technology, but this is why I specifically say it's a socio-technological shift,
yeah,
right? And humans are humans no matter where they are. So we have a tendency for tribalism, we have a tendency for dogmatism, and that exists in spaces that are supposed to be more open, right?
yeah,
And it's this constant battle between, yes, we must believe in ourselves and, we're trying to disrupt, and that is difficult, but don't become lost in the sauce, for lack of a better words. Don't become lost in your vision of it and lose the perspective of what we're trying to change, right? Crypto, cryptocurrencies and the economic side of things is popular. It's what is seen. It's people love money, people care about money, and science does need better ways to, or alternative ways to help fund research or how to help fund itself, but that it has limited capacity towards all of the level of value that exists within the scientific ecosystem, and that is not the be all end all. And so I think when anybody leads with this idea of money and bringing money in, one, people are skeptical already with the crypto narrative of scams and all that, and verifiably so.
right.
But also, there are limitations to the kind of funding that researchers can even take in, whether they be a part of an institution or a part of an accredited investment firm or whatever. All money is not accept just because all money is present doesn't mean that it's equally accessible to researchers. And just throwing things at them doesn't help. It doesn't change, right? You need to understand what context and through what channels you can provide those resources. And that is as much financial as it is tooling, as it is the ability to own or to IP or to whatever these assets. So again, I think, there are people with really great ideas, and to your point, are coming from a marketing background, feel like they understand how science works, but have never really been in the trenches of science or understand that to run a clinical trial, it's not just let me give you $1 million, right? Or to run just a simple academic lab process, just give you $1 million and then you will own the asset and you can put it in NFT or whatever vehicle you want. Like that's not how it works. You can't just do that. And if
No,
it was how it worked, we'd be a lot like more further down the line than where we are today. So
so this is a very, you know, one little plug. This is going to be a series because I mean, honestly, we have already opened up maybe like 5 quite meaty topics that we need to get into. As an example, like this, like debunking myths such as DeSci is just about the funding rails or it's just about DAOs. Oftentimes I think that kind of people are there. But I do want to, Filippo, I want to kind of go back to you. I had a question for you, and maybe this is a good question for us to kind of wrap up this particular podcast on, and then we'll come back because I mean we could do this weekly, guys.
yeah.
So Filippo, you mentioned community. I know, of course, I know you and I, like we go back years with the Nordic Blockchain Association. I'm way too short to ever play at the NBA, but I've attended NBA, spoken at NBA. But I kind of, and Jelani, you mentioned this community. So I kind of want to end with this idea of like, um, and I know in Europe in particular, there's much more stringent focus on patients owning data. Like there's a European health data space, and there's MiCA, there's a lot more. I think US tends to be somewhat optional, or like, we have TEFCA, we're going to have 4 giant companies essentially govern themselves, which really works, only in theory. But anyway, I want to go back to kind of this idea of community and the European way of looking at patient health data. And then if you could just play out like what would be like a citizen science project. We kind of talk, we didn't necessarily say citizen science, but like Jelani, you mentioned this idea of being more proximal, to the actual patients, to the actual users. I mean, there's many, kind of complications, but so
Yeah.
Filippo, if you could just elaborate on that, like how does that like play out? Maybe an example in what you've seen in Nordics, and that may be a good way for us to like queue up future conversations.
I mean, I would say in general, I've been in this space or at the intersection of healthcare and blockchain for many years now, and I've seen a lot of projects come and go, right? And one of the things that was very, I would say, bullish, maybe bullish is not the right word because it makes it financial, but interested in supporting was decentralized health records, right? Oh, you can put your whatever smartwatch data or your genome sequencing or your blood samples or whatever, or your running activities on chain, right? Using NFTs, using decentralized identifiers. I think this is definitely a new type of economy that is being unlocked, like patients really owning their data, right? And tokenizing it, monetizing it, and realizing how valuable your data is, right? However, I've seen, even though I thought that those use cases were quite interesting, that D-Health in the past and Steppen and a few others, we haven't really seen a full-scale adoption of those use cases. And there must be different reasons for it. Of course, in a way, patients, or well, I wouldn't even say patients, I would say humans, users. Another one is Word Health app, or Word app, the one where you scan your pupil and so on. In a way, we don't really understand we're giving up our data, and we don't give value to our data. I would say, yes, you have some small communities, and we've seen this in DeSci growing and growing, and people are happy to put their data on chain. But I think there's not a full understanding of how much you can actually get out of owning your data, right? On the other side, I would say I haven't really seen any killer apps as well that are actually giving you enough value to say, oh, well, I decide to put my data on chain rather than on Garmin or Apple or whatever, wherever you put your data, right? So I think we're still early on, but for sure, one of the most interesting use cases is decentralizing health records. So I'm still a bit doubtful, actually. I don't know. I would like to ask you as well. Why haven't we seen any apps or any products really making it through, right?
Yeah, that could be a long conversation too.
That's a whole long conversation because there's
Yeah.
a whole angle here of regulatory, right? Like GDPR precludes you from being able to ever put anything on chain because you have to have the opportunity to be forgotten. And so you'd have to building L1s that may have capacity or GDPR compliant, but there's stringent regulation around patient privacy, more so outside of the US than in the US, but even here, even in the, I'm in Canada, but even below me, there's limitations, there are regulatory limitations. And so, you could have a killer app that can take in all this data and can commit. And I don't advocate to ever putting health records on chain. That's not something that I personally think is a great idea. But there are so many more things that we can do, but the regulation isn't in place for us, right? There's a lack of regulatory clarity on how these novel technologies can be applied in the biomedical context. And so in the same way that, better regulatory clarity is allowing for DeFi to kind of move forward or, blockchain integrated finance to move forward, we need a lot more conversations with regulators from the scientific and patient privacy space to understand the technology and explore the opportunities here to actually make it much more robust. Because this isn't necessarily introducing data leakage data where it's all out there. It can actually help improve these systems that right now are actually holding back the innovation of science. And it's those kind of conversations that I think we need to start having more of. Right? This is kind of the opportunity now for us to pull in these conversations with existing TradSci and be like, hey, there's maybe a slightly better way of doing this, which appeases you, makes sure people are safe, but operationalizes a lot of the things that are just slow.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot, and we've kind of run out of time a little bit. And so we'll queue it up for next time. I will say, Jelani and Filippo, to me, like this, from my perspective and having tried to build a business in this area for a long time, I don't know if we're really that close to any kind of a decentralized user app in general, much less within health. However, I am actually pretty optimistic that there are certain areas that one way or the other DeSci has kind of unveiled. I give you an example, IRBs. If you're going to do, like we're working right now, as example, this is a real example, so I'm not projecting. We have a proposal on Research Hub. So Research Hub, it's kind of like this community, but it allows peer reviewers to essentially get paid and provide some bounty for them. But there's a lot of transparency to that. But these are much smaller, in my experience, largely preclinical or more of a novel therapy type of use cases. But a big question, this is something that I've actually raised to Jeff and his team at Research Hub, is how do you deal with, or can you help provide a solution for IRBs? Because $100,000 open open science, citizen science project, if it has to go to a traditional IRB, the entire budget will be taken up just with the traditional IRB. Not to mention the timeline will be derailed. I mean, it's just going to be torpedoed. So to me, that's an opportunity. I think this idea of like transparent, legitimate peer reviews done by scientists, not random people, who just looking to fish for tokens, and there is some kind of a reputation mechanism. This can actually really work, and I've seen it. Again, I'm not taking any kind of a credit, but I will tell you, we have right now, we have a project on use of the Wim Hof method as a means for novel cancer therapy. Just tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Wim on a podcast, Wim and his team, myself and his research shop about this. This is real, and if you look at it, it's a openly available proposal. You can see the funding or whatever, but there is a rigorous protocol. There's a scientific protocol to it. It's been reviewed by a bunch of people. So I think, to me, these are areas where I actually see in a niche that really we can do this better. We could do it. I mean, it's a whole lot better than sending an application and spending I don't know, months on an application, sending it to NIH, and a year and a half later getting feedback, and going nowhere. I think, to me, that even right now, I'm working on some things with the federal government, and just the kind of like the pro forma element of engaging with them is so ordinary, so like out of context with actual work that you're like, I will never get through this. It almost like and this federal acquisition regulations in the US FAR, it's almost set up to be gamed by very few entities that are very big, who can afford to have, like lots of educated in doing just proposal writing. And I did work, at the CDC, so I've seen it from all sides. But my point, though, is that these are areas in science we can really improve with DeSci. I genuinely believe it. I think engaging with the patients directly and some of the biomedical kind of process and things like this, I think it requires more elaboration, more collaboration, people like us and then other people to get together and say, all right, how do we do better? But I'm optimistic that there's definitely some like little like underbellies to this that we can do a whole lot better almost immediately. I
I
don't know.
agree. No, I agree. And I know we're running out of time, but that's a whole conversation that I think is of value here. But yeah, it's going to change, right? Change always happens with the people, and the people want change, right? It's just going to take however much time it's going to take. But there's no doubt that there's going to be an eventual shift in how we do science. And hopefully conversations like these and other future ones and the one with Wim Hof and all these other ones are going to help just nucleate these ideas with new people and just open their eyes to there's a different science. We're here, we're the innovators, we're the forward thinkers, we're the vanguard, but at the same time, we become super dogmatic in how we believe this must happen. And this is an opportunity for us to shake that up.
Yeah, it's I will leave the last word to you, Filippo. I will say though, this idea of being dogmatic, it's funny because when you merge crypto and science, and they both kind of come from, if you look at it maximally, very, very like rigid mindsets and very like, my way or the highway type of thing, even down to like which chain you use, which honestly, I kind of feel like that was such a 2020 conversation. These days, I mean, it's fully abstractable, right? But
I have
anyway,
a whole side story I can talk to you about that. But yes, sorry.
yes, yeah, we've all been in this space for too long and building for too long. Filippo, last word from you, and then I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, again, I mean, DeSci is really a new approach to do science. You're building on open science, but using tools that are native to the Web3 space. So decentralization, immutability, transparency. So I think we just need to see more and more use cases, more people talking about it, more people educating and showing traditional science. What are the opportunities, right? I hope to see more university jumping on the DAO train and using tokens to fund their research, for example. So and this is the only way to break into traditional science and potentially change incentives and economic structure. So looking forward to do more series on DeSci and learn more, since I'm still very new to this.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, you may be new to DeSci, but clinical research inside and out, and it's so important for all of us. I think we kind of go across the gamut, right? With our experiences, but also really being builders and not just speculating and kind of podcasting, but actually having kind of got a lot of scars along the way, having done
Yes.
it, dealt with all sides of it. So I think this is Jelani, Filippo, thank you so much. What a brilliant conversation. Tori
Thank you.
Sinai is our leader behind CDHLS and Blockchain Healthcare Today. So Tori, thank you for arranging all of this with us. But I think this is going to be fantastic. I'm excited just to even personally chat with you guys, but I think we can project. I think there's reason for an outfit like CDHLS, Coalition for Decentralized Health and Life Sciences, to exist, to shed light a little bit less, I would say, kind of like self-servingly, about some of these things, because it needs nuance. Anyway, thank you guys. I really
Thanks a
appreciate
lot, Jim,
it.
and thanks, Tori.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Tori.
Bye. Thank
Filippo, it was a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Take care. Talk to you soon.
Likewise. You.
We appreciate you tuning into this conversation. Stay tuned for a DeSci series coming your way in 2026 from CDHLS, the Coalition for Decentralized Healthcare and Life Sciences. Contact us at info@partnersindigitalhealth.com. Mark your calendars for the 2026 ConV2X Decentralized Health event Jelani plugged, September 24 and 25 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thanks for listening.